Shoftim, judges. After the death of Yehoshua the son of the people, the people of Israel asked Adonai, "Who will give up us first to fight against the Canaani?" Adonai said, "Yehuda will go up. Here, I have handed the land over to him." Yehuda said to his brother Shimon, "Come up with me into my assigned territory so that we can fight against the Canaani. I likewise will go with you into your territory." So Shimon went with him. Yehuda went up, and Adonai gave the Canaani and the Perizi into their hands. Of those in Bezek, they killed 10,000 men. They found Adonai Bezek in Bezek, and they fought against him. They killed the Canaani and the Perizi, but the Adoni Bezek fled. They pursued him, caught him, and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Adonai Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off gathered foot under my table. God has paid me back in accordance with what I did. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. Then the people of Yehuda fought against Jerusalem, captured it, overpowered it with the sword, and set the city on fire. Afterwards, the people of Yehuda went down and to fight against the Canaani, who lived in the hill country, in the Negev, and in the Shvela. Yehuda also attacked the Canaani living in Hebron, formerly called Kirat Arba, and they overpowered the Shishai, Ahiman, and Talmiah. From there, they attacked the inhabitants of Devir. Devir was formerly called Kiryat Sefer. Caleb said, "To whoever overpowers Kiryat Sefer and captures it, I will give my daughter Aksha as his wife." Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it. So he gave him Aksha, his daughter, as his wife. After becoming his wife, she persuaded him to ask her father to give them a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Give me a blessing, since you give me land in the Negev. Also, give me sources of water." So Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Next, the descendants of the Canaani, Moshe's father-in-law, went up out of the city of date palms with the people of Yehuda into the Yehuda desert south of Arad. And they came and settled with the people. Yehuda went with Shimon his brother. They overpowered the Canaani who inhabited Ziphat and completely destroyed it. The name of the city was called Hormah. Yehuda also took Azah with his territory, Ashkelon and its territory, and Ekron and its territory. Adonai was with Yehuda, and they took possession of the hill country, because they could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, since they had iron chariots. They gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moshe had said to do, and he drove out from there the 3 sons of Anak. The people of Benjamin did not drive out the Yevusi, who inhabited Jerusalem. Rather, the Yevusi continued living with the people of Benjamin in Jerusalem, as they do to this day. The people of Joseph likewise attacked Beit El, and Adonai was with them. The house of Joseph sent spies to Beit El. The city was formerly called Luz. The spies saw a man coming out of the city and said to him, "Please show us the way to enter the city, and we will treat you kindly." So he showed them the way to enter the city, and they overpowered the city with the sword. They let the man and his family go free. He went into the land of the Hittim, built a city, and called it Luz, which is its name to this day. Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beit Sha'an and its villages, Ta'anak and its villages, Dor and its villages, Yevleim and its villages, or Megiddo and its villages. So the Canaani managed to keep on living in that land. In time, when Israel had grown strong, they did put the Canaani to forced labor, but failed to drive them out completely. Ephraim did not drive out the Canaani living in Gezer, so the Canaani continued living in Gezer along with them. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron or Nahalol, so the Canaani continued living with them but became subject to forced labor. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Echo, Zidon, Achliv, Achziv, Halba, Aphich, or Rachov. So the Asheri lived among the Canaani who were living in the land because they did not drive them out. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beit Shemesh or Beit Anat, but lived among the Canaani, living in the land. However, the inhabitants of Beit Shemesh and Beit Anat became forced labor for them. The Emori forced the people of Dan into the hills. They would not let them come down to the valley. The Emori had resolved to live in the Heres hills, in Ailan, and at Sha'avim. But the power of the house of Joseph grew greater. They became subject to forced labor, so the territory of the Emori was from the Scorpion ascent and the rock upward. Now the angel of Adonai came up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you up out of Egypt, led you to the land I swore to your fathers, and said, I will never break my covenant with you. You, for your part, are not to make any covenant with the inhabitants of this land, but must tear down their altars. However, you have paid no attention to what I said. What is this that you have done? This is why I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they will be on your flanks, and their gods will become a snare for you. When the angel of Adonai spoke these words to all the people of Israel, they began crying and wailing at the top of their voices. So they called the name of that place Bochim, crying, and sacrificed there to Adonai. When Yehoshua had sent the people away, the people of Israel had gone each one to his assigned property in order to take possession of the land. The people served Adonai throughout Yehoshua's life, and throughout the lives of all the older men who outlived Yehoshua, and who had seen all the great work of Adonai which he had done for Israel. When Yehoshua the son of Nun, the servant of Adonai, died, he was 110 years old, and they buried him near the boundary of his property in Timnath Heres, in the hills of the Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. When the entire generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation arose that knew neither Adonai nor the work he had done for Israel. Then the people of Israel did what was evil from Adonai's perspective and served the Baalim. They abandoned Adonai, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods selected from the gods of the people around them, and worshipped them. This made Adonai angry. They abandoned Adonai and served Baal and the Ashtaroth. The anger of Adonai blazed against Israel. He handed them over to the pillagers, who plundered them, to their enemies around them, so that they could no longer resist their enemies. Whenever they launched an attack, the power of Adonai was against them, so that things turned out badly. Just as Adonai had said would happen, as he swore to them, they were in dire distress. But then Adonai raised up judges who rescued them from the power of those who were plundering them. Yet they did not pay attention to their judges, but made horrors of themselves to other gods and worshipped them. They quickly turned away from the path on which their ancestors had walked, the way of obeying Adonai's mitzvot. They failed to do this. When Adonai raised up judges for them, Adonai was with the judge and delivered them from their hands of their enemies throughout the lifetime of the judge. For Adonai was moved to pity by their groaning under their thus oppressing and crushing them. But after the judge died, they would lapse into worse behavior than that of their ancestors, following other gods to serve and worship them. They abandoned none of their practices or stubborn ways. So the anger of Adonai blazed against Israel. He said, because this nation violates my covenant which I ordered their fathers to obey, and they don't pay attention to what I say, in the future I will not expel ahead of them any of the nations that Yehoshua left when he died. This is how I will test Israel, to see whether or not they will keep the way of Adonai, living according to it, as their ancestors did. So Adonai allowed those nations to remain where they were, without quickly driving them out. He did not hand them over to Yehoshua. These are the nations which Adonai allowed to remain in order to put the test all the people of Israel who had not known any of the wars of the Canaan. This was only so that the generations of Israel who had previously known nothing of war might learn about it. These nations consisted of 5 chiefs of the Philistine, all the Canaani, the Zidani, and the Hivi, who lived in the hills of the Lebanon between Mount Baal-Hormon and the entrance of Hamath. They stayed there to test whether Israel would pay attention to the mitzvot of Adonai, which, through Moshe, he had ordered their ancestors to obey. So the people of Israel lived among the Canaani, Hitti, Emori, Perizi, Hivi, and Yebusi, taking their daughters as their wives, giving their own daughters to their sons, and serving their gods. Thus the people of Israel did what was evil from Adonai's perspective, forgot Adonai their God, and served the Baalim and Asherim. Therefore the anger of Adonai blazed against Israel, and he gave them over to the hands of the Cushan Rishatayim, king of Aram-Nahim. And the people of Israel served Cushan Rishatayim 8 years. But when the people of Israel cried out to Adonai, Adonai raised up a savior for the people of Israel, and he rescued them. This was Othniel, the son of Caleb's younger brother, Kenaz. The spirit of Adonai came upon him, and he judged Israel. Then he went out to war. Adonai gave Cushan Rishatayim, king of Aram, into his hands. His power prevailed against Cushan Rishatayim. So the land had rest 40 years, until Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. But the people of Israel again did what was evil from Adonai's perspective, so Adonai strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done what was evil from Adonai's perspective. In confederation with the people of Ammon and Amaleak, Eglon went out and defeated Israel, capturing the city of date palms. The people of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. But when the people of Israel cried out to Adonai, Adonai raised up from them a savior, Ehud, the son of Gera, from the tribe of Benjamin, a left-handed man. The people of Israel appointed him to take their tribute to Eglon, the king of Moab. Ehud made himself a double-edged sword 18 inches long and strapped it on his right thigh under his clothes. Then he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Eglon was a very fat man. When he had finished presenting the tribute, he dismissed the people who had brought it. But he himself, after reaching the quarrels of Gilgal, went back and said, "King, I have a secret message for you." The king commanded silence, and all his attendants withdrew. Ehud came to him. He was sitting alone by himself in his upstairs room, where it was cool. Ehud said, "I have a message from God to you." As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached out with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and thrust it into the king's belly. The hilt, too, went in after the blade, and the fat closed around the blade, for he did not draw out the sword of his belly that came out behind. Then Ehud went out into the porch, shut the doors upstairs room behind him, and locked them. After Ehud had left, the king's servants came. Seeing that the door of the upper room was locked, they said, "He must be relieving himself in the inner part of the cool room." They waited until they became embarrassed, but then he didn't open the doors to the upstairs room. So they took the key and opened it, and there before them lay their master, dead on the ground. But while they were delaying, Ehud escaped. He passed beyond the quarries and arrived safely at Seirah. Upon arriving in the hills of Ephraim, he began sounding the call of the shofar. The people of Israel went down with him from the hill country. He himself took the lead. He said to them, "Follow me, because Adonai has given your enemy Moab into your hands." They went down after him, seized the fords of the Yarden opposite Moab, and permitted no one to cross. On that occasion, they defeated Moab. Some 10,000 men, all tough, experienced soldiers. Not one of them escaped. Thus was Moab subdued that day under the power of Israel. Then the land of Israel rested for 80 years. After Ehud came Shemgar, the son of Anat, who killed 600 Plishtim with an ox goad, and he too rescued Israel.